My name is Marc Clark, and my call sign is W2MIC. Thank you. I am here to talk about solar power for amateur radio operations and boondocking. And here is an example of how it's done. This is Rhodes' truck. You see the solar panel on the windshield of his vehicle there. So my goal here is to talk about boondocking, dispersed camping, sometimes called dry camping, national parks, Bureau of Land Management, national forests, any place you can go. For those of you like me who are old enough to have a national parks geezer pass, otherwise known as the free lifetime pass, this is where you go. No utilities, so we're not talking about a KOA campground. We're not talking about an established campground. We're talking about being out in the middle of nowhere. What we are not talking about, I am not a solar panel expert by any means. We are not talking about roof-mounted solar panels, although we do have people here who have such, and I may pass questions to them, Dave. We are not talking about off-grid ties, again, Dave. We are not talking about motorized mounts, but we will talk about reorienting the panel by hand. Sun, it's that big, bright, shiny thing up in the sky that's not with us today. If you have a fixed panel, like on your roof, everything happens between 10 a.m. and 2 p.m. If you are able to reorient the panel, what I am seeing is that I get good sun, usable power, lots of it, from about an hour after sunrise to about an hour before dusk, if I point the panel at the sun. So here is an example of a couple of my panels, and for scale and reference, phooey, thank you. This is a 100-watt solar panel. It's flexible. It's not very flexible, but you can curve it enough to put it on the roof of a vehicle and have it mounted. It weighs about 4 pounds. Rhodes, can I show yours? All right, try to do this without tipping it. This particular panel is 100 watts, 4 pounds, $180. So the flexible panels are very light and very easy to move around, but they're about twice the price of a fixed panel. Ooh, this is a 100-watt panel. It weighs about 27 pounds. It's big. In this case, Rhodes has the solar controller here, and we'll come back to those in a minute. This you can use, but it's a bear. It's also about half the price of that one. So the choice is 100 watts, heavy and cheap, light and expensive. Solar panels, there are two technologies. Both of them work equally well, monocrystalline and polycrystalline. And polycrystalline is a little bit less expensive, a little bit less efficient. All that means is a 100-watt panel is a 100-watt panel. The monocrystallines are a little bit smaller, about 10%. I went with these panels because I can fit 4 of them on top of my Chevy Suburban. So that was my decision factor. Rigid, as I was just showing you. They're really designed for mounting on a roof. They are not vibration resistant. They're meant to be on a roof and sitting still and not moving around. The flexible panels are designed for mobile use, and they will withstand vibration better. Solar panels, 12-volt panel. Oh yeah, the terminology is really confusing. I think perhaps deliberately so. A 12-volt panel that outputs 16 volts to 18 volts, a 12-volt panel is for use with a 12-volt battery system. A 24-volt panel, which will output something more like 40 volts, is actually designed for use with a 24-volt system. So don't be confused. Do solar panels degrade? Yep, about 1% per year. So over the 25-year warranted lifetime of the panel, you're going to see about a 25% power drop-off. Question?
Well, what's the advantage of the flexible panels?
Lightweight, easy to stow in your vehicle, doesn't take up a lot of room. For those of us with lower back owies, lifting it up and putting it on top of vehicles, not such a big problem.
But it doesn't necessarily have to flex. I mean, you could just have a light frame on it.
Sure. Lots of people who do carry around the lightweight panels will build a PVC or a wooden frame with legs that will let them adjust the angle. Both work equally well.
Question on the degradation.
Yes.
Is that greater or less or the same based on use? If you put it in a closet, does it degrade less?
Rhodes, confirm for me. It's
The degradation is just due to exposure to UV light.
Okay.
So if it's out in the sun, it's going to break down and lose that
But if
output.
you kept it in a closet when you're not using it, it'll last slightly
Correct.
longer?
Yep.
Do you have any idea what the actual percentage loss is over X time?
1% per year is the industry
I
standard.
see. So sometimes when we get a hold of these used panels that are 20 years old, they're still quite usable from a hand's point of view.
Yeah, I mean, I work with customers on a professional level who've got panels from the 1970s that are still working. They've got about half their nameplate output at that point, but they work. And these people paid a boatload of money for them back then. They're paying probably $10 a watt, where today you can get them for 70 cents a watt.
Do you have access to surplus panels for ham use?
Not really.
I was going to say, answer carefully.
People keep them because they keep working.
This is what Rhodes was just referring to, the nameplate. This is off of my panel. This is a 100-watt panel, and the first two numbers are immensely deceptive. The open circuit voltage and the short circuit current, you multiply those two together, and the manufacturer says, haha, that's a 100-watt panel. And you go, wait a minute, you can't have both open circuit and short circuit at the same time. How does this work? Well, you care about those numbers because your controller will be rated for how many volts can it handle and how many amps can it handle. So the first two numbers are what you care, the open circuit and closed circuit are what you care about for your controller, so you don't blow up your controller. The numbers that you really care about are the max power voltage and the max power current. This is what you can get out of the panel if you are using a maximum power point tracking controller. If you are using a pulse, PWM, pulse wave mode, pulse width modulation, wow, thank you. You can expect to get that much current, but not that much voltage, because the PWM controllers throw away everything more than your battery wants, and we'll just use 14 volts. So if you have a battery being charged at 14 volts and your panel outputs 21.6 volts, you won't get the power between 21 and 14. You just get from 14 on down. The good news is that as you are running into your batteries, there are a bunch of different battery systems, and boy have I learned a lot. This is a battery system that you happen to charge with solar. So what you're thinking about here is batteries, and how do I charge them, and what kind of batteries, and how much do they cost, and how long do they last, and how much power can I pull out of them. We all know about vehicle starter batteries, lead acid batteries like you all have in your cars. You don't want those for ham radio. Those are designed for high cold cranking amps to turn your engine over. Those are not designed for a low current draw over a long time. You'll destroy your starter battery that way in no time flat. A deep cycle marine battery is kind of a halfway. A deep cycle is a battery that's built with solid lead plates, whereas a starter battery is built with soft lead plates. They're fairly penetrable. A marine battery, did I mention obscured terminology, is a starter battery. So you can get a deep cycle battery that won't start your engine, and you can get a deep cycle battery that will start your engine. A deep cycle battery that will start your engine is called a marine battery. Why they don't just call it a deep cycle starter battery, I don't know. As you go, you run into Purkert's law. For those of you who are fans of Robert Heinlein, ain't no such thing as a free lunch. The higher the current you draw from the battery, the lower the usable capacity of the battery. Manufacturers rate their batteries by running them at 5% of current of amps. So if you're running a 100 amp hour battery, you run it at 5 amps for 20 hours flat. That's how they rate the battery. That destroys the battery. You can't do this. Again, obfuscation, deception. Marketing, yes. So in real life, if you have a 100 amp hour battery, you can safely draw it half. You get 50 ampere hours out of a 100 amp hour battery. If you have a deep cycle battery, you can pull 80%, but you're shortening the life of the battery to do so.
What about lithium?
We're going to cover that down at the bottom, and it's the $10 per amp hour number that says nobody uses them. If you're hiking and carrying the battery, like doing a Summits on the Air, then by all means you want LifePo. If not, well, absorbed glass mat batteries, which have the advantage that they don't outgas hydrogen gas when you're charging them, and you can tip them over, so you can run them on their side, on their end, upside down. They don't care, they don't leak. But they're about 2 to 4 times the price of a lead acid battery. So your cheapest battery is a deep cycle battery, lead acid. However, they outgas hydrogen. If you tip them over, they spill sulfuric acid. That can be more excitement than you really want. Gel cell batteries, nobody's really using them because the AGM batteries do everything better, about the same price. And lastly, we have the lithium iron phosphate, LiFePO. They start at $10 per amp hour. They're great batteries. Their voltage curve is flat. They run until they're empty and then they fall off, as opposed to a slow decline in voltage. And some radios don't like declining voltage. However, the price, if you're going to buy a 100 amp hour battery, that's a $1,000 battery. I suggest there are better ways to go. Question?
No.
Bart?
The LifePO has another advantage in that you can charge it very quickly,
Yep.
up to about 80% before you taper off. A lead acid battery, you're going to charge it like a turtle, no matter what. It will not charge
You
fast.
can throw ridiculous amps at a LiFePO battery real fast.
Yeah, but to do it properly, that battery needs to be balanced by cell for maximum use, as opposed to a one set of terminals per a battery like the AGM or a gel cell.
Well, and another thing is you actually reduce the life of the batteries if you don't finish the curve on a lithium iron phosphate battery. You want to charge them to 100%, otherwise you degrade the battery, over time.
Cuts it down. There's a whole other college course in battery science that we could have here, but probably don't want to.
This could be a 6-hour presentation, no trouble.
Mark, you got a question over here?
Question?
Can you use lithium ion or lithium polymer batteries with your radio?
Certainly, yes. Battery capacity, otherwise known as C, and this is a hugely important number. The manufacturers discharge their battery at 5 amps or 5% over 20 hours, then they rate the battery. This destroys the battery, which they don't care about, and they don't tell you. You really, and you need to check for your battery because the different manufacturers do have all of this data for each specific battery. It'll either be on their website or you can call tech support. And what they want you to do is discharge no faster than 0.2 C or perhaps 0.3 C. Now, this is critically important if you're running a ham radio transmitter, HF at 100 watts, which is going to pull about 22 or 23 amps. That in turn says that if you're going to run 22 amps at 2.2 C, you need a 100 amp hour battery. So I keep talking about 100 amp hour batteries. If you're running at lower power, you can have a smaller capacitor battery. But in order to run safely and not destroy the battery at 22 amps, you need a 100 amp hour or bigger battery. Same comment, you cannot charge them too fast. The lithiums you can, the standard batteries, both lead acid and AGM, you cannot. And again, the manufacturer will tell you this. Good solar controllers, you can program exactly how you want the battery charged, voltages, max current, etc. And the manufacturers will tell you all of this stuff if you ask. You can draw no more than 50% of C for the best life. And let's see, you can draw 80%, but you're going to shorten your battery's life. You need to charge, this is again that Tonstoffel stuff, there ain't no such thing as a free lunch. To recharge an empty 100 amp hour battery, you have to put 130 amp hours into it. Because it's 12 volt battery and you're running current, that's 12 volts times some current is heat. And this is why when you're charging a battery too fast, you will heat it up enough to boil the electrolyte, literally. That's a bad thing. And so there is a maximum charge rate for all of these different battery technologies, and you just can't go too fast. Okay, charge controllers. Pulse wave modulation, and we'll pull that one up again. The advantage is it's old technology, it's well proven, we know how to build them. They're really inexpensive. The little one like this, what's the capacity on this one?
That's actually the junction box, the little white cube in the corner, that's the charge controller.
Here we are.
That does, I think it says on it, about 5 or 7 amps is what it's rated for.
I believe it, somewhere.
Good for one panel.
5
It's
amps.
perfectly sized for a single 100 watt panel.
Yep.
And it's small, it's seated, so it's water resistant. So I just crazy glued the thing on there. Connected the MC4 connectors from the panel directly into that. Then I've got a power pole that I just plug into my truck. coming off the charge controller.
Nice.
So I can put a cigarette plug adapter on that, and I can literally plug it into anyone's car and recharge the battery. You get a cig plug.
And a PWM controller, the cheap Chinesium ones are 20 bucks. The pretty decent American ones are 40-ish. Question?
Okay, I bought an MPPT charge controller
Yep.
on eBay,
Yep.
like 25 bucks.
Okay.
It's not, it's a PWM
Right.
controller.
So now,
Be careful, they lie.
there's a lot of really deceptive stuff out there. This is an MPPT, or a maximum power point tracking controller. It will handle 40 amps or 4 panels in serial. It's bigger, it's more expensive, it's about 180 bucks. It's fully controllable, so you can, every parameter for the battery, for what's the bulk charge, what's the float charge, etc. You can control voltages, you can control currents, you can stick a temperature probe on, and you really do want a temperature probe on your battery because you don't want to boil your battery. So you can control by max temperature. More expensive, you can get remote control heads, you can get Wi-Fi heads, so you can control it from a couple hundred yards away. Yeah, really. You can get data loggers that plug into it and will record stuff, and you can just plug it into your computer and get your graphics back. As an electrical engineer, I like the MPPT controllers because you lose about 30% of the power of the panel if you're using a PWM controller. Worse in the winter, not as bad in the summer. This thing will get you all 100 watts out of the panel if there's enough light, but more expensive. Question?
Do you have any comment on the relative RFI from these two different types of technologies?
Everybody's really concerned about that. I don't have enough first-hand data, Rhodes.
I don't really either. Did I send you that Midnight Solar thing?
Yep, we've got a lot of people who are deeply concerned. I'm going to address that in just a minute. The real answer is I don't have enough first-hand data to know yet.
I can recommend, there's some good videos on YouTube about that. The PWM controllers are pretty HF noisy, especially when they're at the while they're doing a lot of charging. Once you start coming up in voltage and then the pulses start becoming less frequent, it's less of a problem, but there are some great YouTube videos that explain that.
My plan is to put chokes on everything because I've got 50-foot cables from my controller to my panels. I want to park my vehicle in the shade where I'm in the shade. I want the solar panels in the sun. I've got 50-foot cables. Those are called receiving antennas because I'm running 100 watts somewhere right here. So I figure I will be sending my own RF in through the cables, if nothing else. Yes, you will, yeah. All right, so here's my controller with some wires. So the red and black wire is to the battery, and the big black ones are my 50-foot cables. You can get any size cable. You can make your own. The ends, number 4 connectors are readily available. This is my messy backyard, and my panels, plural, are on the left. I've got 2 cables running over. I've got a big 100 amp hour battery sitting in the box, and I've got my controller sitting on top. So you can separate your panels from your controller by quite a distance and still be in good shape. I'm running my panels in series, so panel, 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 because that gives me 20 volts per panel times 4 is 80, but I'm only running 7 odd amps through the wire. If you're putting your panels in parallel, you're getting more current. Now you need thicker wires. So I'm running 50-foot number 10 cables, which is plenty good at 7 amps and 80 volts. If you are putting your panels in parallel, you're going to discover that you're going to spend a lot of money on cables because copper's bloody expensive.
But Mark, don't you waste a lot of money on panels by wasting the current that they would have available to charge a battery?
No, because an MPPT controller will take the product of 7 amps times 80 volts and will run that through a DC to DC converter. That's what the MPPT controllers do. And it will transform that to 14 volts to charge the battery at however many amps that is.
So this is similar to the way we do our power distribution, so to speak.
That's correct.
Bring it up to 1 million volts and transmit it without worrying about the current loss.
Yes, sir.
Well, perfect.
That's exactly it.
This is your house transformer.
Perfect, yeah, perfect.
Yes.
Yeah, that's the big difference between MPPT. They take that higher PV voltage and lower amperage, and as Mark said, intelligently convert that to battery voltage and ramp up the amperage. So you get, depending on the manufacturer, mid to upper 90% efficiency between the power of the panel and what goes into the battery.
My particular controller is rated 99.5. I haven't measured enough yet. That maybe, if there's so much deception, I want to measure that.
And PWMs on the other side, all they do is they just pass the current straight through. So whatever the delta is between your array voltage and your battery voltage, that's what you're losing. So if you had, your 80 volts and 7 amps, you're only getting 7 amps into the battery. The voltage is irrelevant.
Here's an example with my MPPT controller. I've got 40.1 volts coming off my 2 panels in series, 20 volts each, at 0.1 amps. It was a day like today. It was overcast, it was fixing to rain, there was no sun. Out of the controller comes 14.6 volts, which is what I programmed to charge my battery, at 0.4 amps. So you get to shift both voltage and amperage for maximum power with an MPPT controller. And this is why I like the MPPTs. So let's see.
Is that your remote head for your control?
Yes, this is my remote head. And this can be separated by a cable, so it can be tens of feet away if you want. Current draw from older radios. Okay, now how do you figure out what you need? Here's the formula. You figure out how many days how much time you're gonna spend listening and how much time you're gonna spend transmitting. I assume 16 hours a day listening because I gotta sleep 8 hours a night. With my older ICOM 706, that has a 2.5 amp draw, just listening, not talking. That's a killer. My LDG tuner pulls about 200 milliamps. My Kenwood TMV71A pulls about 1.5 amps. And the math comes out to 16 hours listening and 20% transmitting. And I'm looking at 56 amp hours plus 70 amp hours in one day. Remember that with a 100 amp hour battery, I get 50 usable amp hours. So that's 2 100 amp hour batteries per day.
How much does that go down if you turn off the display backlighting?
It turns out the display backlighting is the majority of the draw.
Yep. At least on my radios. Some radios you can turn that on.
Yep. Yep. So on my radios, I can in fact turn them all the way down to just reflective, and that helps a lot. If you get a newer radio, like a Shack-in-a-Box ICOM 7100, that's 600 milliamps listening. That's a big difference. And it does everything in one box. So as I was talking with Rhodes one day, complaining about how much it was going to cost me to build out my system, because I've got $1,000 into 2 panels of controller, wiring, etc. And I was looking at least 3 or 4 more panels, and I was just crying. And Rhodes said, well, I'm running a 7100, and he gave me some current draws, and I immediately ordered a newer radio. Because it was cheaper to buy a newer low current radio than it was to build out the solar system. And smaller.
And I immediately got him to loan me the old radio.
Well, I do need to keep up my bad influence credibility. So if you are running a Shack-in-a-Box at low current, I'm now down to 86 amp hours a day. That's with 200. But what I'm seeing, now we get to the Armstrong method and running that panel around, if I point the panel at the sun, I get at least 10 good hours. That's on days when the sun is shining. So that gets me back more than enough amperage to keep my batteries charged up and have some reserve for the next day when it's like today. So my 200 watt system, even with an overcast, so a light overcast will cut your power in half. A heavy overcast will cut your power down to 1/4. So if you're figuring there's going to be some sun and some clouds, you need to oversize your batteries and oversize your solar panel system. My suggestion, question?
One thing you might mention is that just putting a hand in front of part of the panel will reduce it by X.
25%.
Yeah.
There you go. So be careful when you're out there. If all of a sudden the sun comes across some branches of a tree,
Yep.
It may look like the panel's getting most of the sun, but just a little bit will take off a lot.
Yep.
Yeah.
A little bit of shade.
So, question?
You may be, I may be getting ahead of you, but if you have a panel flat as opposed to optimum aiming,
Yes.
how much efficiency do you lose?
Rhodes?
Tough to say for sure. The nameplate rating of a panel is based on the sun, basically being perfectly perpendicular to the panel.
Right.
And the irradiance of 1,000 watts per square meter, which on a sunny day in Colorado is what you're going to see.
And that's what I'm measuring.
So is it 50%?
Or worse.
Or worse?
Probably the cosine of the incidence.
It's the cosine of the incidence. Yep. So to indirectly answer your question, I've been doing a lot of research. if you have the panel optimally aligned at the sun, and the sun, of course, moves 15 degrees per hour. If the sun starts off 15 degrees off, that's only going to drop your power output by 5%. More than 15 degrees off, that's a big drop. So the answer is set your panel up 15 degrees ahead of the sun, let the sun come across 1 hour, let the sun go past 1 hour. You're still getting 95% of the power available. Then reorient your panel an hour ahead of the sun, et cetera, et cetera.
The reason I ask is I'm building a comm van where the panels are they have to lay flat.
Yep.
And the people that are gonna be operating, I don't trust them to go climb a ladder and aim. So they're gonna lay flat, and I'm just kind of wondering how much am I gonna be losing?
I'd double the size of the array.
I think cosine is 60 degrees.
I'm putting 280 watt
Yep.
panels.
You need to oversize by a factor of 2.
Yeah, something like that, personally, I just cover the
706 or
whole panels
7100?
if possible.
Yeah, I
Because
can't
mobile
do that.
applications, you know, you're gonna be limited just by the space you have.
Okay, one more question.
Question?
If you need to double your battery capacity, are you going to talk about that, or is
Yep.
it, you are?
Yep.
Okay.
Right now. So what's my recommendation? Number 1, skip solar completely. It's hugely expensive. It's not reliable. Today you get none. At night you get none. During gray line propagation you get none. When you're running a lot, you get none. Think of this, as Rhodes says, not as a solar system, but a battery system. How much capacity do you have? How much can you operate? How do you recharge it? My suggestion is to buy yourself pairs of 6-volt golf cart batteries. They're less than $1 per amp hour. They're the biggest bang and the least price per amp hour. Charge them at home, take them out with you, draw them down 80%, bring them home and recharge them. 220 amp hours is going to cost you under $200, and you're going to have to buy batteries no matter what system you use or how you do it. Start there. Question?
Yeah, well, I don't know, maybe James can help me with this. There's an Interstate battery gun outfit over at Fort Collins.
Yep.
Do they sell those?
Yep.
Okay.
Interstate deep cycle batteries are very good. Costco, if you remember, has the killer deal on Interstate deep cycle batteries. Yep, Sam's Clubs are pretty good, but Costco's are much better.
Even better than the blends?
Yep. Yep, and if your purse permits, the Trojan 105s are the gold standard. Am I correct, Rhodes?
I'm sorry, which one?
The Trojan 105s.
That's the standard. I wouldn't call it the gold standard. It's the most common in off-grid systems.
Yep. They're what
It's the Chevy of batteries, in my opinion.
Yep. Okay. And put in a battery isolator so that your alternator, which is already there in your car, running, paid for, existing, etc., can be used to charge your batteries. So you may need to drive around for an hour because your alternator will source as much current as the batteries will take. You already have that. Dave, what did you spend to get an isolator put in?
My isolator was $95, I believe, and then the wire for it was another 60.
Remember what I said about wire. So that's my suggestion. And then, if you need, in other words, if you want to add solar because you're running out of batteries, and it's way cheaper to buy another set of batteries than it is to start buying solar stuff. Start with a starter kit, a 100 amp panel, and a 30 amp controller. Goes on Amazon for $170. A 100 amp hour flooded lead acid battery at Walmart is $100. So you're looking at $270-ish. A smaller controller. My theory is you'll start with the one panel, but you'll discover you need more, so buy a controller bigger than one panel and work up. And that is it. Any further questions? Oh, Greg.
Jim Wilson, KC0RVT, has a cabin up the booter that's on solar. He has, I think, the same model of charge control you have, the 40 amp.
Mm-hmm.
His system, he's wired for high voltage low current.
Mm-hmm.
So he's only running a couple amps, and he found out that down at that low amperage, it does not do MPPT.
Many do not.
And then it switches in and out of different modes, and it keeps recycling all his, he does a lot of digital stuff, control up there, and it keeps tripping everything. So he's going to want to sell his 40 amp EP-Ever. So if anyone wants to buy it, get a hold of him. KC0RVT has his own repeater.
So
and then there was that point about buy too big of a controller for the current you're going to be controlling?
So fraud is rampant. On eBay, you can find many so-called maximum power point tracking controllers that are not. There are several channels on YouTube, Adam Welsh comes to mind, where he takes them apart and says, oh, this is labeled as an MPPT, but it isn't because it doesn't have any big toroids in it. Many of the lower priced controllers will run as MPPTs at high voltage and switch over to PWM at low voltage. My controller, as you saw, running at 40 amps and 40 volts and 0.1 amps was in fact running as an MPPT. So it was switching both voltage and current. Dan?
Is there any possibility of going, being hams and being cheap by nature, is there any possibility that we could go to golf courses and see if they've got some retired batteries that we might be able to get from their golf carts?
Sure.
Because they run 36 and 48 volts. I have a 36 volt golf cart myself.
Yep.
And I scrounge batteries whatever I can. I get them $25 to $35 a piece, and they last me for years.
Sure.
I mean, they may not meet the capacity needs of a golf course,
Right.
but they meet my capacity needs.
Yep. Basically, my approach is to offer them the core charge, which they would get if they returned the battery to a store. And I'll haul them away for you, and you don't have to make the trip. Yep. So will degraded batteries work? Yes. So if you have an older battery or a battery that's not holding quite full current or full charge, yeah, they still work. And your controller will tell you what's going on.
Right, so in case of, instead of getting 220 amp hours out of it, let's say you get 150 amp,
Yeah.
who cares?
Still, at that price, it's the best price per amp hour to be found. Greg, I'm sorry.
Practical experience.
Yes, sir.
Going out boondocking. What's the longest period of time that you've gone out and done your radio work and had the solar set up and everything like that? How long? How many days have you done this?
I have not yet, other than backyard tests. I am sized to run indefinitely. So with my newer radio with the low current draw, 2 panels and MPPT, I'm set to go even with 1 cloudy day out of 5. So whether you want to just keep operating until your batteries are flat, or whether you want to be able to run indefinitely, it's a much smaller system to just put some current in and keep you going. But it's way more expensive than just buying golf cart batteries and bringing them up with you. Any more?
If you need multiple batteries, do you use one until it's flat, unbolt it, connect up another one, or do you put them in parallel with some kind of diode isolation?
So you can do it either way. My approach is I run off of a bare battery because of RFI concerns. So all of my HF work, both at home and mobile, I am running off of a standalone battery, no charger, no nothing. And if I'm charging another battery, I'll have that somewhere else, and I'll deal with the RFI over there. And that way my HF is always clean, and I'm not off chasing RF bunnies coming in through the wiring or the controllers or the leads or whatever the heck. I do put choke wires on my battery power leads to my radio at both ends, because that's a receiving antenna and I'm running 100 watts right up here.
So back to your earlier point, remember, about the discharge rate of batteries. If you have 4 equivalent batteries and you use them one at a time, you are going to get a certain rate out of each battery. If you take those 4 batteries and put them in parallel, you are going to get considerably more than 4 times that rate out of the battery, because you've dropped the C at which you're drawing the battery. I don't care what radio you're running. If a large number of batteries are in parallel, you will last dramatically longer.
Do you run the risk of self-discharge where one voltage is slightly different than the other?
Not with lead acid, no.
Yeah, it's not important.
That's not usually an issue.
Okay.
Plus the diode has to be very high current to be able to handle it. And in other words, even if we use shotkeys, and there's going to be some sort of a voltage drop loss across that diode. So
In a straight parallel, you don't need that.
that's right.
Yeah.
Question?
Speaking of being cheap, if you don't want to buy a solar panel and a PWM controller, I'm voting for the Harbor Freight Tailgater 2-cycle generator. They're under $100.
88 bucks.
Yeah, 88 bucks, you know, whatever.
Yeah.
And that's what I use when I go camping. They put out 800 watts. They're an armature generator, so they're not an inverter type where they're
And how-
lots of switching
How
noise.
fast is the recharge cycle on that gasoline? about 10 seconds to refill the tank.
Yeah,
There you
yeah.
go.
Well,
Beat that.
plus you gotta mix oil. I mean, other than that.
Yeah.
So that's a less green way to go, but I mean, it does work.
I have a Honda EU 2000i, which is an inverter generator. I can run the radio directly off of it. I have a converter, which is the name for a 117 volt AC to DC that'll run 30 amps into my batteries. So that's another approach. But remember, you're up there in a vehicle and you already have an alternator. So generators certainly do work, but now you're getting really expensive per amp hour used. So yes, and I have a generator, it's my backup system. Greg.
Yeah, just one quick point on charging batteries with solar. You look at these panels and you have a bunch of these square things that are hooked up in some fashion. And each solar cell is what, 1.2 volts or something?
Oh, yeah.
So they can be wired, you can have a panel that's high voltage, low current, or you can have one that's lower voltage and higher current, depending on how they're wired. If you're not in a hurry to charge your lead acid batteries, and if you can kind of keep an eye on them, and you have a panel that's a lower voltage, around 16 to 20 volts open circuit,
Right.
and not too much amperage, typically a 50 watt panel for a 100 amp hour battery, you can simply hook the solar panel right to the battery, and it will pull the panel voltage down,
To 14 or
and
15
you just
or-
watch your voltage on the battery as it charges until it gets up to about 14 volts. And you can then manually disconnect. Now you don't have anything that's generating RFI. But you have to either watch it or build something simple that will watch it for you and disconnect the panel when you hit like 14.
Or you could sort of do your math when it comes to that too. In other words, if you could even use bigger panels, because I've done this with 100 watt panels, just put them right on there.
Yeah.
And you know, if you have this, like he's done the calculation with your approximate, let's just say you're going to be an 80% squelched receive, so to speak, at so much milli, and basically you're going to be putting back some portion
Right.
of what it is that you're taking out. So you'll never get into an overcharge mode.
And what I've done also, which is horribly inefficient and very wasteful, but also very cheap and doesn't cause RFI, is I've just taken a, I think it's an 1152 12 volt tail lamp bulb from the auto store
1156.
and put that in series. I've done it with low current. Like I can take a 3 amp 13.8 volt power supply, run it through that tail lamp bulb, which limits maximum current to an amp, and hook that up to a 100 amp hour battery, and just leave it permanently.
That's an excellent idea.
And I can run 100 watt
Yeah.
single sideband occasionally off that battery, and then just walk away from it, it'll recharge. You can do the same thing with a solar panel. Just run it through that tail lamp bulb and leave. It's now a trickle charger. It would take forever if you ever deeply discharge the battery.
Right.
It would take forever to
We've been
recharge.
using that system when it comes to even like things like to protect receivers with
Yeah.
very small bulbs. We've been
Yeah.
doing that forever. So that's absolutely, that series bulb thing is a regulator. Yeah.
So you can do that to maintain a battery that you're just going to occasionally use.
You've been patiently waiting?
I wasn't gonna say nothing, I'm just.
Okay, I'll just.
He's opening the door
He's
before
holding
he
up the
falls.
frame.
Open the door.
Okay, thank you.
This presentation was brought to you by the Northern Colorado Amateur Radio Club. For more information, visit our website, ncarc.net. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to like and subscribe.